I didn't go there for answers. I went with a latte. It was Thursday, just after noon, when I parked outside Atlas Meridian and carried my wife's almond milk order through the revolving doors like a peace offering. Victoria loves routine. Same coffee, same smile at the lobby, same wave to the guard. I figured I'd be the pleasant surprise in a long day of meetings. Instead, I became the man who saw the stage lights flick on and realized the play wasn't written for him. "Here to see the CEO?" The guard, Bill, asked. "Her husband," I said, lifting the cup as proof. Bill's face did that little crumple people do when they've already spoken to the wrong person. He tipped his head toward the elevators. Her husband just came through. The doors slid open, and a man in a charcoal suit strode out with the confidence of someone who's never been told no. Damon Cross. I knew the name from Victoria's updates. Damon pulled it across the line. Damon's invaluable. He nodded to Bill, then to me, like we were all part of his morning circuit. I smiled like an accountant who'd found a rounding error and didn't want to spook the client. "Dropping lunch for Victoria," I said, handing Damon the bag before he could question me. He took it easily, like he'd done it before. I walked out without asking a single thing. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I want to see how far truth can travel when you finally say it out loud. Back in my car, I set the untouched latte in the cup holder and stared at the building's mirrored glass. If you've ever watched your reflection in a facade like that, you know the trick. It gives you back a version of yourself you recognize, until you shift an inch and the whole image fractures. That night, Victoria came home late, brushed a kiss across my cheek and said, "Back-to-back meetings." I didn't even have lunch. I waited for the follow-up. "Did you drop by?" But she breezed past me to the sink, rinsing a glass like we were still in the same story. Numbers don't lie. People do. I didn't accuse her. I catalogued. The receipts, the calendar pings, the tone in her voice when a text arrived. If there's a single moment a marriage tilts, it was me standing in that lobby, latte cooling, deciding to stop being the man who trusts and start being the man who verifies. Suspicion doesn't start with fireworks. It starts with a whisper that won't leave you alone. After the scene in the lobby, I didn't storm through the house or interrogate Victoria with dramatic questions. That isn't my nature. I'm an accountant. I deal in patterns, not panic. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I began reviewing the numbers of my marriage like they were entries in a ledger that suddenly stopped balancing. The first thing that stood out was small, almost laughably so, a receipt from Chez Laurent, tucked between grocery coupons on the counter. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine, total $68.50, modest, romantic, intimate. She told me that night she was meeting a client from Portland, a woman she'd been trying to secure for months. But there were no notes scribbled on the receipt, no business card, no corporate tip added. It was the kind of clean, simple bill you get when the company is familiar. I placed that receipt under a coaster like I was hiding evidence from myself. Then came the gas charges. I logged into our joint account and saw a handful of refills miles away from her usual route, far west of her office, nowhere near her clients. I traced the dates against my calendar. Those were days she'd said she was working late. Those were the nights she came home freshly showered, with hair that smelled like hotel soap. Not the lemon shampoo she keeps in our bathroom. Then the bookstore charge. $37.12 at 3:24 p.m. on a Tuesday. She'd claimed to be in back-to-back meetings. Victoria hasn't voluntarily entered a bookstore in 7 years. She reads on her tablet now, convenient, tidy, untraceable. I kept finding these micro-fractures, tiny misalignments, a pattern forming behind the scenes. But suspicion alone isn't evidence. And evidence isn't truth. Not yet. That night she sat across from me at dinner, fork tapping against a plate like a slow metronome. She smiled. She talked about quarterly projections. She asked about my day. And every time her phone buzzed face down on the table, she touched it like a reflex, like something alive might escape from under it. I didn't ask who was texting. I didn't ask why she kept glancing toward the hallway, waiting for the next vibration. I simply watched the woman I'd shared 28 years with move like someone rehearsing a part in a story I didn't recognize. The ledger wasn't balanced anymore, and I was finally ready to audit everything. The next shift came quietly, on a Tuesday morning, in our own kitchen, with sunlight spilling across the counter like nothing was wrong. Victoria left early for a leadership meeting. She rushed out with her laptop bag half-zipped, coffee in hand, jacket draped over one arm. She kissed my cheek the way someone signs a receipt, automatic, thoughtless, habitual. 15 minutes later, her laptop chimed, not mine, hers. She'd forgotten to close it before leaving, and the screen lit up with a cascade of notifications. I don't snoop, truly. 28 years teaches you respect for privacy. But when the universe drops information into your lap, refusing to look isn't loyalty, it's denial. The first notification was an event reminder. Dinner, Bellacourt. 7 p.m. Damon. My stomach fell through the floor. Bellacourt, our place, the spot where I'd proposed to her 17 years ago during a storm that knocked out the power and forced the waitstaff to light candles at every table. She used to laugh about how unplanned it all was. Life's best moments aren't scheduled, she'd say. She scheduled this one. I moved the cursor, hands steady, breath shallow. The calendar opened into a color-coded kingdom I hadn't been invited into. Recurring events. Coffee with D, Tuesdays, 8 a.m. Strategy sync, Thursdays, 7 p.m. Weekend planning, Saturday. A cluster of doctor appointments appeared from the past 2 months. She hadn't mentioned a single one. And Victoria isn't lax about her health. She narrates her entire medical history each flu season, like she's giving a TED talk. Then I noticed something worse. Events marked private. Repeating. Evening hours. Always followed by gaps where she came home late and exhausted. I clicked nothing. I screenshotted everything. That night I took the long way home and passed by Bellacourt. It sat glowing under its warm string lights, doorway open, like a mouth ready to swallow secrets. In the far corner of the small parking lot, in space, Nutregent 12, I saw it. Victoria's silver coupe, right beside Damon's black Mercedes. I sat across the street, engine off, headlights dark, watching couples step inside, some laughing, some touching hands. Some wearing the expression I used to see on Victoria when she spotted me waiting at a restaurant table. The truth wasn't whispered anymore. It was shining through glass panes and candlelight. I drove home in silence. The windshield reflecting back a version of me I didn't recognize. A man who finally understood his marriage had begun to live in 2 separate calendars. The truth hides in the smallest, most ordinary places. Ours was hiding in the junk drawer. 3 days after seeing her car at Bellacourt, I was looking for a spare battery when something metallic slipped under my fingers. A key. Not a house key, not an office key. A brass key attached to a fob from Seaview Towers, a waterfront complex neither of us had ever mentioned. Victoria and I have lived in the same home for 18 years. We don't have a second address. The key sat in my palm like a confession. I stared at it for a long time, weighing possibilities, excuses, explanations. But there's a tone your instincts take when they've grown tired of being ignored. And mine were done whispering. I drove to Seaview Towers that afternoon. The building rose clean and modern against the shoreline, the kind of place for professionals who crave simplicity, efficiency, and privacy. Very Victoria. I parked in Visitor, walked into the lobby and waited. 10 minutes later I saw him, Damon Cross, approaching with a garment bag over his shoulder. He entered the building without hesitation, tapping a code into the keypad, like a man walking into his own life. My chest tightened, not with grief, with clarity. I took the elevator to the 2nd floor, heart pounding in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Unit 214 sat at the end of the hall. I lifted the key. My hand didn't shake this time. The lock turned smoothly. The air inside smelled faintly of eucalyptus, the same oil Victoria keeps in our bathroom. The living room was styled in soft grays and blues, furniture modern, minimalist. a throw blanket draped across the couch, a pair of wine glasses drying on the rack, a half-burned candle on the coffee table, on the side table, Victoria's reading glasses, a silk scarf. I'd bought her last Valentine's Day, her favorite moisturizer, the one she told me she'd stopped using because it was too expensive to replace. I walked down the short hallway, 2 toothbrushes and a glass, a drawer partially open with women's clothes folded neatly, a man's cologne on the dresser, one I didn't recognize. Then the final blow, a slim black folder labeled in her tidy handwriting. Future plans, inside, a rental agreement for Unit 214. Printed emails between her and Damon discussing a fresh start. Notes from a family law consultation outlining a divorce timeline. And a business outline positioning Damon as CEO of Atlas Meridian within 2 years. She hadn't just drifted away. She'd relocated, emotionally and physically, and she'd been documenting how to remove me from a life she'd already rewritten. I closed the folder, took photos of everything, and walked out quietly. That day, something inside me hardened, not into anger but into resolve. The truth wasn't hiding anymore. Now it was mine to use. Saturday morning arrived with that strange, heavy stillness that tells you something irreversible is about to happen. Victoria came downstairs in her pale yellow robe, hair pinned up, humming softly, a sound I once associated with comfort. Now it struck me as the rehearsed calm of someone who believed she still controlled the script. I placed the black folder labeled Future Plans on the kitchen table. She froze, just for a second. Just long enough for me to see her real expression before she slid on the CEO face. "What's that?" she asked, voice carefully neutral. "I went to Seaview Towers yesterday," I said. "Unit 214. Use the key you left in our drawer." Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp. She didn't deny. She went still, calculating. "How much do you think you know?" she said quietly. "Enough to understand the truth," I replied. "Enough to see the apartment. Enough to read your consultation notes." A long silence stretched between us. Steam rose from the coffee pot. A bird chirped outside the window. Life went on, unbothered, while ours stopped. Victoria's shoulders softened, not into vulnerability, but into acceptance, like someone settling into a chair they'd been avoiding. "Ethan, we haven't been happy for a long time," she began. "You know that." "No," I said. "You haven't been happy." "I was content." "There's a difference," she sighed, weary, almost annoyed. "You stayed exactly the same. You never pushed yourself. I outgrew who we used to be. Damon and I—" "Don't," I said calmly. "Please don't try to paint this as growth. You were building a new life behind my back. Not because I held you back, because you wanted more. Without losing anything." Her jaw tightened. The mask slipped. "You're impossible to talk to when you're like this." "I'm not being dramatic," I said. "I'm being factual. You rented an apartment. You created divorce strategies. You planned a new corporate structure with someone you're sleeping with." She sat down across from me, folding her hands like she was opening a board meeting. "I was going to tell you. I just needed the timing right. I plan to file next month. Damon and I want to get married by Christmas." For a moment I felt the old instinct, the one that wanted to defend, to fix, to salvage. But it flickered out. The man she was talking to no longer existed. "I'll call a lawyer on Monday," I said. "Ethan, we can do this amicably," she pressed. "There's no need to burn everything down." I looked her in the eyes and finally said the sentence I'd been building toward since the lobby incident. "You already burned it. I'm just documenting it, and for the first time." Victoria understood she no longer held the power. On Monday morning, I walked into Harold Benton's office, carrying a manila folder thicker than my marriage had turned out to be. Benton is the kind of attorney whose silence says more than most people's entire vocabulary. He motioned for me to sit, adjusted his glasses, and opened the folder without a single pleasantry. I watched his eyes scan the photos of the apartment, the screenshots from Victoria's calendar, the receipts, the rental contract, the family law consultation notes. He didn't interrupt. He didn't gasp. He didn't take sides. He simply absorbed the way seasoned lawyers do when they're assembling a strategy in real time. When he finally leaned back, he spoke with the calm certainty of someone who'd seen this scenario 100 times and had already won 98 of them. "This," he said, tapping the folder, "is leverage. Leverage for what?" I asked. "For everything," he replied. "You don't need theatrics. You need accuracy." He outlined it plainly. Adultery, supported by consistent evidence. Misuse of marital funds. Joint money spent on the second apartment and frequent meals. Undisclosed conflict of interest. A romantic relationship with a direct subordinate. Unauthorized corporate decisions. Victoria had begun mapping with Damon. "People imagine divorce battles are about emotion," Benton said. "They're not. They're about documentation. You already did the hard part." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not victory, just clarity. "Do you want scorched earth?" he asked. "No," I said. "I want fairness. And the truth on record," he nodded. "Then we begin." That afternoon, I made a call I never imagined making to Arthur Lang, the chair of the Atlas Meridian Board. I didn't rant or accuse. I didn't mention the affair. I stuck to facts, clean, unemotional, irrefutable. "I believe there may be a governance concern regarding undisclosed conflicts and planning outside the approved chain," I said. "You may want to review certain decisions for compliance." Lang listened without interrupting. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mr. Cole." I could tell he already understood the gravity. Corporate boards fear two things: liability and scandal that changes shareholder confidence. He wouldn't ignore my call. When Victoria came home that night, her expression was different, tight, brittle, something between fear and fury. "Arthur called me," she said. "The board is opening a review. Meetings are being frozen until further notice." "That was you, wasn't it?" "It was the truth," I said. "You built a house on two foundations. One of them was always going to crack. You're destroying my career," she snapped. "No," I replied calmly. "You just can't hide it anymore." Her silence this time wasn't cold, it was shaken. She had finally realized I wasn't the quiet man she could maneuver around. I wasn't the background character in her ambition story. For the first time since the affair began, the consequences were catching up with her, and I didn't have to ruin her. The truth was doing it for me. When pressure hits a corporation, it never starts with an explosion. It starts with silence. Meetings postponed, emails sent at odd hours, calendars mysteriously clearing. That's how Atlas Meridian reacted after Arthur Lang opened the governance review. Victoria tried to act unfazed, but her posture shifted. She moved through the house like a woman carrying an invisible weight. Every time her phone buzzed, she stiffened, expecting another call from the board. Every evening she sat at the kitchen table longer than usual, fingers tapping patterns only anxious people make. 2 days into the review, the first domino fell. Damon Cross was terminated. The official reason: undisclosed relationship with a superior and compromised judgment in strategic planning. The unofficial reason: the board had seen the screenshots, the overlapping calendars, and the restructuring drafts that had never gone through formal channels. Victoria stormed into the house that night, slamming her bag onto the counter. "They fired him," she said, voice trembling with the anger of someone who finally realized her choices weren't happening in a vacuum. "I'm sorry," I said calmly, "but that was coming." "You went behind my back." "No," I corrected. "You went behind the boards." She didn't reply. There was nothing left to defend. By week's end, the board took their next step. Victoria wasn't fired. She was too effective, too embedded in ongoing contracts, but she was placed on probation and temporarily stripped of unilateral authority. All decisions over a certain threshold now required sign-off from the newly appointed COO, a man whose entire personality was procedure first. To Victoria, this was worse than termination. They hadn't removed her, they had contained her. Our divorce proceedings moved in parallel. Benton worked quietly, professionally, and with surgical precision. Victoria realized quickly that the settlement she'd envisioned the apartment for her, the house sold. Damon moving in after Christmas was no longer realistic. The financials came back clean but damning. She reimbursed the marital account for the Seaview Tower expenses. She relinquished her claim on our home, acknowledging my larger financial contribution. The rest was split equitably, with no alimony requested or granted. It wasn't revenge. It was math. Friends and colleagues began to drift from her "we grew apart" narrative. Whispers travel fast, but truth travels accurately. People treated her differently. Less admiration, more caution. Meanwhile, my life shifted gently. My practice grew. Clients noticed I seemed lighter. I slept better. I cooked again. For the first time in years, the house felt like mine, not a waiting room for someone else's ambition. By the time the divorce papers were signed, Victoria wasn't angry anymore. She was tired. That's what happens when consequences stack up quietly, relentlessly, until even the strongest facade buckles. And the most surprising part, I didn't feel victorious. I felt balanced, like a ledger finally reconciled after years of quiet errors. The first morning after the divorce was finalized, I woke up to the sound of nothing. No phone buzzing with corporate emergencies, no hurried footsteps, no clipped voice rehearsing a meeting agenda. Just quiet, deep, steady grounding. I brewed coffee the way I used to before life became a negotiation. I sat on my porch with the sunrise spilling across the railing. For the first time in years, the peace didn't feel like an intermission. It felt like a beginning. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is loud, restless, impatient. What I felt was something quieter, heavier, but far more honest. Completion. 3 months passed like that. I reorganized my practice, took on clients I actually enjoyed, reconnected with friends I'd slowly drifted from while trying to maintain a marriage built on shifting sand. I even started attending a midweek cooking class, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the space for. Healing isn't cinematic. It's small moments that add up quietly, like deposits into a forgotten account. Then one evening my phone buzzed. The name on the screen froze me for a heartbeat. Victoria. I debated ignoring it, but avoidance never served me before. I answered. Her voice was softer than I'd heard in years. Not defeated, just stripped of the layers she used to perform through. Ethan, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. She didn't rush. She didn't dramatize. It wasn't the polished apology of a woman trying to control perception. It was human, worn, real. I'm sorry for how I did it, she continued. For lying. For letting things go so far. You didn't deserve that. I deserved the truth, I said. We both did, she exhaled shakily. I thought I knew what I wanted. I thought ambition could replace everything else. It can't, I replied. It never could. There was a long pause, one of those moments where two people finally acknowledge the damage without trying to rewrite it. Are you happy? She asked quietly. Yes, I said simply. I am. That's good, she whispered. You were always the steady one. The safe one. I didn't correct her. Safe isn't a flaw. Stability isn't a weakness. Those qualities just weren't compatible with the life she wanted. And that's all right. After we hung up, I stepped outside again. The evening breeze moved through the trees, carrying that same quiet I'd grown to appreciate. I realized then that closure doesn't arrive with a dramatic twist or a final confrontation. It arrives when you look at your life and see nothing missing, only space finally cleared for peace, for possibility, for yourself. Victoria had moved on. Damon had vanished like a footnote in a story that was never meant to last. And me? I hadn't won her back. I'd won myself back. The ledger was balanced. Finally, and this time the numbers told the truth. Revenge is a word people misunderstand. They imagine flames, shouting, slammed doors, a dramatic downfall. But the most powerful revenge, the kind that actually restores a person, is quiet, precise, almost gentle. About 6 months after the divorce, I learned something I hadn't expected. It arrived casually, through a former colleague of Victoria's who still brought his taxes to my office. He sat down, handed me his documents, and said almost offhandedly, Strange what happened over at Atlas Meridian after you and Victoria split. I didn't ask. I just listened. According to him, the governance review had uncovered more than the board originally suspected. Not criminal, nothing illegal, but layers of decisions Victoria had made alone, cutting corners in ways that were efficient but not compliant with internal policy. Damon's removal had exposed gaps, and those gaps led to more questions. Eventually, the board reorganized several leadership roles, shifting authority away from individuals and into committees. Victoria stayed, but the empire she had been building, the one she tried to replace me with, never materialized. My colleague said, "She's good at her job, but she burned through a lot of trust." She's quieter now, quieter. That word stayed with me. Not defeated, not ruined, just human again. After he left, I sat alone in my office and let the reality settle. I never sought to destroy her. I simply stopped covering for her. I let the truth stand on its own legs, and it walked exactly where it needed to. A month later, I ran into Victoria unexpectedly at a small grocery store near the waterfront. She looked different. No sharp edges, no corporate armor. Just a woman finishing her day. She saw me, hesitated, then approached. "Ethan," she said softly. "You look good." "You too," I replied. And I meant it. Not because she looked successful or polished, but because she looked real, finally unshielded from the consequences she had once thought she was too smart to face. "I heard your practice is expanding," she said. "I'm glad, truly. There was no bitterness, no manipulation, no tug-of-war, just acknowledgement, you know," she added. "I've been thinking a lot about the last few years. I let myself become someone I don't even recognize anymore." I nodded. "We all do that sometimes." She smiled, a small, tired smile, and walked away with her groceries. No dramatic goodbye, no lingering stare. Just two people who had closed a chapter, honestly. As I watched her leave, I felt something I didn't expect. Gratitude. Not for what she did, but for what I learned through surviving it. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's simply living a life you no longer need to defend. And that, I realized, was the quietest and truest victory of all.